Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Through Conversations podcast, where we invite the world's most brilliant minds and ask them the most pressing questions in today's world. Today, I'm joined by the amazing Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar. Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar is a professor and author who is worldwide known for his popular courses on positive psychology and leadership. He received his PhD in organizational behavior and psychology from Harvard University, where he also taught the course Positive Psychology, which was one of the most popular courses across the university. In addition to his academic work, Ben-Shahar has written several books on the topics of happiness and leadership, including Happier, Being Happy, and The Pursuit of Perfect. He's also a renowned speaker and has served as a consultant to organizations such as Google and the World Bank. And he's also the founder of the Happiness Studies Academy. Dr. Ben-Shahar, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me here, Alex. Great to be here.
I'm very excited because, you touch on a topic that is very fun to every single human being in this planet, which is how to be happy and what happiness truly is. And I'm very curious, when did that spark really first ignited in your heart? When did you find out about this concept of happiness, and how did you become interested in really diving deep into it?
So I became interested in happiness because of my own unhappiness. I was, on a path as an athlete. I played squash as a student, and things went well, at least when I looked at my life from the outside. But from the inside, what I experienced was mostly, a sense of, just sadness, and even more so anxiety most of the time. And I didn't understand why, because the models that I had been taught, whether explicitly or implicitly, had always been, if you want to flourish, if you want to have a happy life, well, then succeed, do well. And I was succeeding. I was doing well in academics, in sports, the things that were important to me at that time, but to no avail. I was still unhappy, and this happened when I was an undergrad at Harvard. I started off as a computer scientist, and in my second year switched to philosophy and psychology just to figure out what was going on here. Why aren't I happy, and how can I become happier?
Yeah,
this was 30 years ago, and I've been on that path ever since.
Wow. So it was probably around your mid-20s that this happened?
Correct. I was in my early 20s, and I started exploring it by reading people like Aristotle and Lao Tzu, and then psychologists like Ed Dinner and Martin Seligman, and I was fortunate to have teachers, mentors who were interested in this topic. The field of positive psychology came onto the scene a few years later, so it was a good time, as is today, to be involved in this field.
Yeah, one of the teachers that you had, I was doing some research before having this conversation, was the author of the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, correct?
Correct. And Nathaniel Branden.
Nathaniel Branden, yeah. And his book is really powerful. And you were really lucky to have him as a mentor, I suppose.
Very much so. Actually, let me tell you a brief story about how that came about.
Yes.
So I was, at that time, I was a student in the University of Cambridge in England. And this was a Sunday morning, and I was just, lying in bed and thinking about how amazing it would be if Aristotle was alive, and if I could, hang out with him and talk about eudaimonia, about happiness and flourishing, and I was filled with, some, sadness. And that he wasn't around, and I couldn't. But I said, well, I have his books. I can enjoy those. But then I reflected some more, and I said, wait a minute. Actually, my Aristotle is alive today, and that's Nathaniel Branden.
Wow.
because I'd read his stuff when I was an undergraduate, and he really impacted my life in a deep and meaningful way. And at that moment, I got out of bed and wrote a letter. We didn't have email then, but I wrote a letter to Nathaniel Branden, who was living in California, and asked him to be my mentor.
Wow.
My teacher. And we ended up, it took a few months back and forth, but we ended up meeting, and I was working under him, learning from him directly. So he, and when he passed away a few years ago, I wrote an article which I titled, where I told the story, and I titled the article, My Aristotle.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'll read that article and also put it in the show notes for every listener to find it out as well. And, what was one core idea that really, really stuck with you from him? What was really a guiding light that you said, this has to be something I need to explore more?
Yeah, good. So hands down, the idea of acceptance. I ended up one of my books is on perfectionism. And in that book, I explore the idea of accepting and embracing our emotions, of giving ourselves the permission to be human. Because one of the greatest barriers to happiness is the fact that we reject unhappiness. Because there is a paradox, and the paradox is very simple. If I experience sadness and I say to myself, Tal, you shouldn't experience sadness. You're the happiness professor. What happens? Immediately, sadness goes up. Or let's say I experience envy towards a friend, and I say to myself, Tal, you're better than that. You shouldn't experience envy towards someone you care about. Immediately, that envy strengthens, it intensifies because of the paradox, which is when we reject painful emotions, they grow stronger. And when we accept and embrace them, and this is Nathaniel Branden's first key pillar of self-esteem, when we embrace and accept the emotion, whatever that emotion is, then it doesn't overstay its welcome. Then we're much more likely to first overcome it, and second, to act, to behave in an appropriate way. So if I accept envy, I'm more likely to actually behave in a generous and benevolent way. If I accept rather than reject sadness, I'm more likely to go out of my way and do things that will contribute to my happiness.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. And it also brought to my mind this quote. I don't know if it was really from Carl Jung, but I think he said, what you resist persists. So whenever you're trying to really repress something, or rather mute it down, it just keeps a much firmer hold of yourself. And another pillar of self-esteem is one of the big ones that I feel your work has been truly a landmark of it, which is self-responsibility, which is we can choose to be happy. It is a choice. It is a synapses in our brain that we can keep exercising. So what is one of the biggest obstacles you think people find when they hear that happiness is a choice?
Yeah, so this is certainly a very important pillar of self-esteem and of happiness, taking responsibility. Specifically here, what I find, which is very pervasive, is what I've come to call the double standard when it comes to happiness. Why? Because people think that if they read this book, whether it's Nathaniel Branden's book or Aristotle or Sonia Lubomировsky, if they read a book on happiness and they really get it and understand that book, then they'll become happier. Or if they attend a workshop or take a class or get a degree in positive psychology, then they'll be happier. Well, that's unfortunately not the case. Think about it. Let's say, do people believe that if they read a book on tennis, they'll become tennis players, or if they read, or if they go to a lecture on classical music, they'll become classical musicians. Of course not. You need to practice. You need to practice, on the court or on the piano or whatever. You need to put in the work, the effort. You need to take responsibility for your improvement, whether it's in music or sports or happiness. And, so many people, would say to me, "Oh, Tal, I read your book." And I said, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. What are you doing about it? Or people would go even a step further. My book is next to your bed. And, and I say to them, that's great, but, I haven't yet mastered the art of impact through, brain waves that come from books. You need to do something about it. It's not enough to read something or to have something close to you. You need to act. You need to take responsibility. And that applies to music, and it applies to happiness.
Yeah, and like you say, you need to practice what you preach. And, it's like when I began this conversation, happiness is something we all really look forward to, and you argue that it's ultimately our most important currency, happiness. And you've written so many books, so many articles. You've done a course focusing on positive psychology, and it seems that we don't really grasp the idea that it is the ultimate currency. Our world isn't really founded upon this philosophy that happiness truly is what is going to make us become the best version of ourselves, or rather, is it the pursuit of happiness that will make us happier? So it's kind of like a paradox. So what are your thoughts on, how do we think of happiness, and how would you wish we should think of happiness?
Yeah. You mentioned the paradox, and there's another important paradox here that we need to keep in mind. And I say that includes positive psychologists or experts in the field who very often miss this important point. So this is based on research by Iris Moss. Iris Moss teaches in San Diego, I believe. And her research shows that people who value happiness, for whom the pursuit of happiness is important, who wake up in the morning and say, I want to be happy. Happiness matters to me. They actually end up being less happy. And that's a problem, because on the one hand, we all want to be happy. It's important to us almost by our very nature. We're also told that if you increase levels of happiness, you become more creative, more productive, your relationships improve. You actually live longer if you increase levels of happiness. So you don't just live better, you live more. So there are all these benefits to happiness. And yet, if you wake up in the morning and say, I want this, I want happiness, it's important to me, you become less happy. And the question is, what do we do about it? I mean, do we kid ourselves? Do we tell ourselves, okay, I don't want to become happier. Wink, wink. I actually do. Of course, self-deception is not the way. What do? We pursue happiness indirectly. Let me explain this through a metaphor that helped me better understand it. So let's say, you walk outside and it's a bright sunny day, and you look at the sun. What's going to happen if you look directly at the sun? It's actually going to hurt you. It's going to burn your eyes. You're going to tear up. So looking directly at the sun is not helpful. But what if I take the sunlight and break it down, say using a prism, and then look at the broken down ray of light, the colors of the rainbow? Then I can look at it and enjoy it and savor it. So looking at the sun directly hurts. Looking at it indirectly is pleasurable, enjoyable. It's the same with happiness. Pursuing it directly hurts. saying to myself, happiness is important. I choose to be happy. I want to be happy. That's not helpful. That will lead to less happiness. However, if I break happiness down into its metaphorical colors of the rainbow and then pursue those, then I'm pursuing happiness indirectly and can become happier. The question then is, what are these metaphorical colors of the rainbow? And again, there are many answers to this. The answer that I argue for is what I've come to call the SPIRE elements of happiness. And the SPIRE elements, SPIRE stands for spiritual well-being, physical well-being, intellectual well-being, relational and emotional well-being. So, for example, under spiritual well-being, it would be about being present, being in the here and now, or doing something that is meaningful and important to me. So indirectly pursuing happiness could be engaging in meditation. Indirectly pursuing happiness could be finding things to do that are meaningful to me, that are important to me. Or under physical well-being, the P of SPIRE, exercising regularly is a form of indirectly pursuing happiness, or eating more healthfully, or intellectual well-being, learning new things. That's an indirect way of pursuing happiness. Or relational well-being, investing in the people I care about and who care about me. So if I wake up in the morning and say, I want to be happy, that's a problem. But if I say, I want to invest more in my relationships and actually do that, then I do become happier because I'm indirectly pursuing happiness. When it comes to the E of SPIRE, emotional well-being, well, that's about embracing painful emotions, what we spoke about a few minutes ago. It's about cultivating pleasurable emotions, such as gratitude. These are all indirect ways of pursuing happiness. This is about enjoying the colors of the rainbow rather than being hurt by the direct sunlight.
Wow. Thank you for that. And it's really impressive because sometimes we get caught up in the end goal, which is happiness, and seeing it as an end goal in and of itself, rather than as an externality, rather than as an outcome of the things we pursue and what your work has been trying to teach us, and your book, Happier, as well. And I really appreciate that you mentioned the pressure that amounts when one is trying to pursue happiness, because a lot of people, including myself, wake up and say, I want to be happy now. How am I not happy now? Like, this is crazy. So it brings not even unhappiness, it just doubles up the pressure, it doubles up the unhappiness, which is you're telling yourself that you're unhappy, so you're meta unhappy. It's crazy. And for us who really are on the stepping stones of trying to find this foundation that you discuss, this spiral of well-being that you discuss, you mentioned gratitude, you mentioned meditation, you mentioned relationships, but if you had to choose one for a person who really is a beginner, who really has to start from the get-go, which one would be your first one to go to?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of answers to that. The first answer is the one that's easiest for you, the one that's most fun for you. Why? Because that's the one where you're most likely to persist. You see, when we talk about happiness, or the SPIRE model of happiness, we're not talking about 5 distinct elements. We're talking about 5 interconnected elements. And therefore, when everything is interconnected, one thing affects everything else. So let's say it's the easiest for you to now invest more time in your relationships. Well, that will affect every other area of your life and your happiness as a result, because it will also provide you with pleasurable emotions. It will also make you more curious through the conversations with your loved ones. It's also very meaningful to you. You're also present when you're in conversation with your loved ones. So it will also make you physically healthier. There's a lot of research connecting relationships with physical health. So you can start there. Or, and this is my second answer to your question, and this is where I find that for most people in today's world, this is the one that's most relevant, become physically active. You know, the research on physical exercise is quite literally mind-boggling. The research shows that regular physical exercise, as little as 30 minutes 3 times a week, has the same effect on our psychological well-being as our most powerful psychiatric medication.
Wow.
So introducing movement into our life, and by the way, it doesn't have to be, you know, a 30-minute gym session. It could be deciding, you know, every hour, you know, to get up and move for 1 or 2 minutes, you know, to run on the spot or to climb upstairs. But movement is critical, of course, for physical health, no less so for mental health. And because everything is interconnected, once you start moving more, your relationships are actually going to improve. You're going to become nicer to be around. If you exercise regularly, you're also going to be thinking better because blood is flowing to your brain. If you're more physically active, of course, your emotional well-being is going to be impacted. So this whole spiral element will be affected by just being more physically active.
Wow. Who would have thought that our most impressive and most breakthrough drug was always within us, you know? The biggest pharmaceutical intervention was doing exercise, which is impressive. And we're living in a world where there is not enough of a premium for us to be moving. We're always stuck in a 9-to-5 job, or we're always trying to chase what you've argued that really doesn't lead to happiness, which is external success. You know, trying to climb the corporate ladder, trying to make a name for ourselves, trying to chase that title. So how can we, you know, move from a world? I'd like to start discussing also technologies that are influencing our workplace and the dangers of this affecting our chase for happiness through external success, which namely is artificial intelligence. But how can we truly keep chasing that external success, like you say, bringing that metaphor of the sun, so that success becomes an outcome, but not be so inclined, not be so obsessed with the success that ultimately makes us feel worse about ourselves?
Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of what determines our happiness levels are our expectations. And, you know, people talk about the importance of having high expectations. And that's true when it comes to success. It's not as true when it comes to happiness. When it comes to happiness, what we need are realistic expectations. Let me give you an example from 2 different areas. So the first example is on a personal level, what I spoke about earlier. If my expectation is that I'm going to experience joy and fun and laughter all of the time, that's a problem. If my expectation is that, well, right now I'm not experiencing joy, fun, and laughter all the time, but when I become an expert in happiness, then I'll experience it all the time, that's a problem. Because as I often remind my students, only 2 kinds of people don't experience painful emotions, such as sadness or anger or frustration or anxiety: psychopaths and dead people. Everyone else experiences these emotions.
Yeah.
So if I have the false expectation, the unrealistic expectation, that being happy means experiencing only pleasurable emotions, that's a problem. And that will only lead to more frustration. That's where we get to the paradox. To have realistic expectations is to say, yeah, I can experience less of them. I can become happier over time. But I will always have these difficult experiences. I will always experience painful emotions. They're part and parcel of every life. That's realistic expectations. Second, think about relationships. You know, what do I expect when I commit to a person? Let's say I get married. Well, the expectation is that we'll live happily ever after. That this passion and love and lust will remain constant or will even rise over time as we cultivate our relationship. Well, not so. You can be sure that in every relationship, even in the best of relationships, there'll be ups and downs, there'll be challenges and conflicts and gridlocks and difficulties and hardships. But if my expectation is, a happily ever after, or, happier ever after, then that's a problem. And it will lead to more frustration rather than to happiness. So to have realistic expectations is critical, because then when we experience the challenges in a relationship or personally, then we're much more likely to accept and embrace them. In Buddhist thought and more recently in scientific research, there is talk about two levels of suffering. The first level of suffering is inevitable. It happens because there are challenges in life, because of what we encounter in life. And, as I said, everyone encounters this kind of suffering for global reasons, for personal reasons, because for hormonal reasons, it doesn't matter. We all experience suffering sometimes. That's first level. Second level of suffering is when we reject the first level. It's when I say to myself, I shouldn't be suffering, I shouldn't be unhappy, I shouldn't experience this pain. Then that increases the initial level of suffering, and we have a second level. The first level of suffering is inevitable. The second level of suffering is a choice. And if we truly accept and embrace what life has to offer, not resign to it, accept it, that it is part of life, then we're much less likely to augment it, to increase it, and to experience the second level of suffering, which is a choice.
Wow. Like you say, part of the treasure of being alive is changing our frameworks, our mind to think that suffering, or rather negative emotions that we have connotated, like sadness, all of these emotions that really bring us down, quote unquote, if we reframe them, like you say, as part of this human experience that we all share, they can bring out the best experiences we have in life, because we've been told that happiness should be the ultimate feeling we have always. And rather than learning from the insights when one is unhappy, when one is sad, when one is feeling a downward emotion, we tend to isolate that side of us and try to pursue more happiness, which, like you say, we've been talking about, is the paradox. And also your first intervention, which was acceptance. If we accept our whole humanity, that ultimately leads to that ray of light, which is happiness from the sun. So I would like to get into the workplace, which is rapidly shifting with new technologies such as artificial intelligence, and really promise to change drastically the whole world around us. So, Dr. Ben-Shahar, I'm curious to know, how will these technologies you think will affect our workplace, and how should companies and also employees and people who work in companies or starting to create new ideas should approach these technologies with the hopes of keeping happiness as a positive outcome in their companies?
So, think about this question. Is electricity good or bad? And the answer to this question is, well, it depends. If you use electricity for, life support, or, to light up a room, or to bring people together, it's a wonderful thing. If you use electricity to electrocute an innocent person, it's a bad thing. So it's the same with just about every kind of technology. What do you use it for? And under what do you use it for, I also include how much do you use it. Take, for example, smartphones. Smartphones are wonderful. The fact that I can, reach my kids or friends whenever, that I have access to so much information and knowledge and music and film, that's incredible. However, when it's overused, when we have quite literally become addicted to it, that's a problem. And levels of happiness have gone down significantly as a direct result of the rise of the smartphone, whether in children or adults. So how do we use it? How much do we use it? That's important. The same with the social media. Social media is terrific. I just got in touch recently with my best friend from elementary school. I hadn't seen him in 40 years.
Wow.
40 years. And we got in touch thanks to social media. Amazing. At the same time, people are addicted to social media, and it's leading to much unhappiness and lower levels of self-esteem in people. So that's a problem. Let's take another example. Most recently, the artificial intelligence program that came out, ChatGPT, which everyone is talking about and using right now. And it's amazing. What it does is wonderful. And there is a potential downside to it, because it could prevent many people from going through the process of making mistakes and learning how to write better. And writing better is connected to thinking better. I'll give you a personal example. So when I was an undergraduate, I shifted from computer science to philosophy and psychology, I hadn't had much experience writing. My worst grade in school was in expository writing. I was all into math, computers, technology. And suddenly I took a writing class. And in the writing class, I wrote the following. We had to write about an experience we had. And I wrote about an experience I had with my girlfriend, where we met for a date. And I wrote the following sentence. I actually wrote the following sentence. I wrote, and we looked into each other's eyes, and we knew that we would be together forever. Now, that is very cheesy writing. That is actually not good writing. However, what happened then, I submitted it, and my teacher gave me feedback about it and told me, show rather than tell, write about the situation and describe the scene where you were. And she taught me how to write better than together forever. And as a result of that mistake or poor writing, I became a better writer. Now, if I had at that time an AI assistant who would just write a better paper for me, I would not learn how to become a better writer. And as a result, my thinking would be less clear. My thinking would be less sharp, less focused. We learn how to write better by writing poorly. We learn how to think better by learning how to write better. And my concern is that many of these technologies, by helping us in one way take shortcuts, will also prevent us from learning things that can't be learned other than through taking the long road.
Wow. Yeah, like you say, it's the long road really is where the gems of wisdom arrive, and the mistakes in and of themselves are really the treasure of the long road, which I appreciate you saying that. And another concern that I had, which really connects with your expertise, is the potential displacement of the people who work in companies who will, quote unquote, be replaceable from these technologies. So this is going to be a big shift. We're probably going to see this in the next decade, perhaps before. So how should people manage this change in their industries, this disruption of technology? And also, how do you think people should use their time. People should spend, this free time, which could be a gem of treasure as well, to pursue the things that we've talked about here, the foundations for happiness.
So when it comes to the change that this disruptive technology will have, there are things that we know and there are things that we don't know. Let me begin with what we don't know. We don't know whether this will actually take away more jobs than it will create. Because people were having this very conversation around the Industrial Revolution, where they were saying, oh, now we have those machines, people are going to become redundant, people are going to be out of a job. Well, it turned out to be the opposite. The Industrial Revolution created more jobs than it destroyed. Yes, people no longer had to, or as many people had to lift heavy things because we had machinery for that, but it created other jobs. Whether it's driving this truck or running this machine, so we don't know that this new technology will actually, on the whole, hurt the job market. It may actually create more jobs than it takes away.
Wow,
this we don't know. What we do know is that the kind of jobs that will be looked for, that will be required in the future, are different than they were required in the past. Those mechanical jobs, machines are going to do, and they do it a lot better than we do. However, the jobs that require thinking and creativity and where emotions are part of the job, or connecting to emotions is a part of the job, well, that probably machines are not going to be able to do, and probably not for the next, I don't know how many years. So what we do know is that elements related to creativity and innovation, there will be there's already, but there will even be more of a premium on those.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, what we need to do is not learn something specific necessarily, but rather learn how to learn. Or in other words, to become lifelong learners. Because this is the only way we can remain creative. This is the only way we can remain innovative. This is the only way where we will have a relative advantage over the mechanical things that machines can do. We need to be prepared to reinvent ourselves for this new world, and then to reinvent ourselves again and again. And for that, we have to be learners, curious, asking questions, exploring constantly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Dr. Ben-Shahar, you've been a consultant in so many companies, including Google and World Bank organization. And it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that implies that these companies weren't built with their foundation keeping people happy, or how to increase happiness levels in their company. So you came in as an intervention or as a consultant to just teach or show them some ways to paradoxically increase productivity without trying to increase productivity, which would be how to make people happy in their workplace. What is happiness? So you mentioned these new industries, you mentioned these new companies that will arise, the jobs that we probably don't even know exist or will exist. So if you had to build from scratch a company, how would you factor in the foundation of happiness? What would be the recipe for a founder to really put this as top of mind, which, like you argue in your work, leads to so many indicators of success metrics, which are productivity, income, revenue?
So first of all, just to your question, many of the companies that I've worked with have been doing a lot when it comes to happiness. And they brought me in because they wanted to do more. They wanted to learn about the latest research in this area. So the assumption that, only companies that don't have happiness, invite a happiness expert, that's inaccurate.
Okay.
There are many companies, and Google is one great example, who do so much for their employees and they're constantly looking to doing more things, better things among their in their workforce. Now, what would I do if I was creating a company from scratch? It's the same that I would do if I was coming into a company that's been around for 150 years. And that is, I would do what I call a SPIRE check-in. A SPIRE check-in I do for the individual, and I do for organizations. And it's basically going through the SPIRE elements: spiritual, physical, intellectual, relational, and emotional, and asking for each one of them, how am I doing? How can I do better? So, for instance, under spiritual well-being, you would have meaning and purpose. How am I doing as an individual when it comes to meaning and purpose? Let's say I give myself a 6. Why am I 6? How can I become a 7? Not a 9. How can I become a 7? Incremental change. Or I start a new company. So we have a goal. How can I introduce this sense of mission and purpose that I experienced maybe as a founder? How can I introduce it throughout the organization? Or let's say under physical well-being, how can I make sure that I as an individual and that my employees are physically active? The food that I bring into the organization, if there is food there, let's make it healthy. Let's make not just tasty. Let's make it good for our body and for our mind. When it comes to physical well-being, recovery ends up being extremely important for dealing with stress.
Yeah.
Because think about stress. You stress your muscles in the gym. Not a bad thing. You actually grow stronger from it. But if you stress your muscles in the gym and you have no recovery, you get injured. And it's the same psychologically. If there is recovery in the workplace, recovery can be about deep breathing, recovery can be about lunch, recovery can be about going to the gym. If you have recovery in the workplace, then the stress that is a natural part of every workplace is actually going to help you grow rather than bring you down. Intellectual well-being, the eye of SPIRE. How can I make sure that employees continuously learn? We just talked about it. If they don't learn, then they'll become obsolete very quickly. Machines will take over. So intellectual well-being is important. Relationships. How can I get people to hang out together? There's a lot of talk now about remote work. Yeah, there are advantages to it, but don't give up on face-to-face, in-person interactions. That's how you develop the best relationships. Emotional well-being. How do you create a workplace where people feel safe, psychologically safe, to express emotions? How do you create a workplace where gratitude, appreciation for one's own work, for others' work is part of the environment? These are all questions that indirectly will contribute to happiness and to more productivity, more creativity, a better organization.
Wow. And for us individuals, you've founded the Happiness Studies Academy. And I would love to hear more about the work you do there and how can one get involved in the Happiness Studies Academy, and what do you wish for everyone who enrolls or looks for more information to know about it?
Well, the purpose of the Happiness Studies Academy is to help our students become happier and to help them help others do the same. And so we have students who come in because they want to be better parents. We have students who are there because they want to be better therapists or coaches. We have managers, we have teachers who apply these ideas in schools because, happiness contributes to any field, from therapy to education to business to government and law. And the way we do it, we have a few programs. So one program that we have is a certificate in happiness studies. And a second program, which we just launched, which I'm very excited about, is a master's degree, the world's first master's degree in happiness studies,
wow,
which we offer with Centenary University. And all our programs are online. So we have students from over 75 countries, which is an amazing experience, being in webinars or meeting them, because we have meetings all over the world. And again, the purpose is for us to bring about more well-being, more happiness, more flourishing in organizations, in schools, in homes, communities, and nations.
I love that. I will add all of the information in the show notes. And I'm curious to know, Dr. Ben-Shahar, you've mentioned 75 nations across the world who tune in. How do you see the differences in nations, in backgrounds, in terms of happiness?
Yeah, so, there are many differences among the nations, among different cultures. At the same time, there are even more similarities.
Similarities, yeah.
A human being is a human being is a human being. We all want a sense of meaning and purpose at home. I may, because of my culture, find it more in individualistic pursuits, and someone else may find it in more collectivist pursuits. We all need physical exercise. I may find my physical exercise, playing basketball, and someone else may find it playing cricket. But we all have universal needs, and it's quite amazing. So just earlier this morning, I had one of our webinars with our students, and again, students from all over the world, and people from China and Vietnam and Saudi Arabia and Israel and Mexico and Brazil and US and Cameroon. We're talking about ideas that were relevant to all of them. How they apply it may differ, but the ideas, the universality of these ideas is remarkable.
Wow. Yeah, like you say, we're all part of this big blue marble, or little marble, if you want to put it in that perspective, in this whole dark sea of the universe, and we all share this collective desire to, make the best out of our time on Earth, which essentially involves getting this distillment of more joy, more happiness, without it being the end goal. But Dr. Ben-Shahar, thank you so much for joining me. This has been really insightful, and thank you for the work that you do. And I'm looking forward to getting to know more about the Happiness Studies Academy and hearing more success stories from your students. So thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much.